On an early autumn afternoon in Atlanta, sunlight filtered through the rows of trees and stretched across the faded wooden floor of classroom 3002 at Riverside Middle School. The class was buzzing with its usual rhythm. The soft hum of student chatter, the scraping of wooden chairs on the floor, and the rustle of pages turning blended into a familiar symphony, a little chaotic but full of life. In the corner of the room, right next to the window where the sun fell the strongest, sat a 13-year-old black boy in silence, as if entirely detached from the noise around him. His name was Jamal Carter. Jamal did not talk to anyone. He never initiated conversations or raised his hand in class. He simply observed quietly and wrote things down, but not the lessons being taught. While his classmates struggled through basic equations, Jamal's notebook was filled with tiny writings pressed against the page, margins places no one else bothered to look. These were not copied notes from textbooks. They were complex equations, advanced algebraic expressions that even high school students might hesitate to approach. But for Jamal, they were a game, a mental challenge he created for himself to test the speed of his thoughts, to race alongside numbers, and find peace within the rules and order of logic. When people assumed he was lazy, Jamal had already gone far beyond the school curriculum. When teachers thought he was inattentive, his mind was actually moving through each step of a problem, each variable, like a puzzle piece, searching for its perfect place. The world outside the window, with trees swaying in the breeze and birds hopping along the fence, was not simply a place to daydream. It was a place to reflect. He connected the gentle motion of nature with the inner logic of mathematics, where everything had structure and every knot had a solution. For Jamal, beauty was not found in the teacher's voice, but in the way a complex equation could be simplified to something clear and precise, like a poem without words. The class teacher, Mrs. Amanda Thompson, was known for her strictness. She walked with purpose, spoke with clarity, and had a gaze sharp enough to silence the entire room. She was not easily impressed. To her, teaching was not about pleasing, but sharpening. She could recognize potential, but she despised laziness. And to her, Jamal was the image of disengagement, a student who scored well but never spoke, a boy who remained silent but could not be ignored. Because among the stack of test papers in her hands, there was only one perfect score, and the name on it was Jamal Carter. She handed the test paper to him without a word of praise, without eye contact, just a quiet placement on his desk. Before turning away, he showed no reaction, simply folded the paper and slipped it back into his notebook. Outside, the classroom noise picked up again, but to Jamal, the world continued to move in slow rhythm. The wind still drifted through the leaves. Birds still leapt from branch to branch. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, then opened them again, as if asking himself a question only he could understand. Mrs. Thompson walked back to the teacher's desk, laid the stack of test papers down, and scanned the room once more. She was displeased. Most of the scores were too low. She had no tolerance for mediocrity, and today her patience was especially thin. As she raised her voice, the room fell quiet. Each word carried a weight of disappointment. She emphasized that the algebra concepts they had just learned were foundational, the first bricks in any future success. She did not yell, but her firmness made it impossible to ignore her. When her gaze swept past Jamal and caught his usual distant expression, something in her stirred. Maybe it was frustration, maybe doubt, or maybe a sudden idea. She paused for a few seconds, then clearly called his name. Jamal flinched. His eyes moved away from the window and back to reality. The classroom shifted. All eyes turned toward him. There were whispers, quiet laughter, filled with anticipation. Some students thought Mrs. Thompson was about to teach them a lesson. Others were simply curious because Jamal was rarely the center of attention. When the teacher ordered him to come up to the board, Jamal felt his legs grow heavy. He stood up, walking slowly past the desks, each step echoing clearly in the unexpectedly silent room. Inside, he was torn between the instinct to retreat and something else rising quietly, a sense of pride, a part of himself he had never shown, the truth that he was not some clueless child, not the kid they assumed he was. Mrs. Thompson stood beside the whiteboard, marker in hand, eyes sharp and unreadable. She wrote out a long equation filled with complex variables, then turned to look at Jamal. This was a test, not to humiliate, but to see whether the quiet student with high scores really understood or had just gotten lucky. The class held its breath. She extended the marker to him, her voice calm but firm. Solve this. Show everyone what you have learned. Jamal took the marker. His hand was sweating. The marker felt cold as ice. Standing in front of the board, he was not just facing a math problem. He was facing himself. The fear of being seen, of being judged, of being exposed. But something had begun to move inside him. He did not have to remain a shadow forever. And this time he chose not to turn away. The classroom seemed to shrink as Jamal stood in front of the board. The marker in his hand felt increasingly heavy with every passing second. He stared at the equation, a long sequence of variables and exponents so complex that most 8th grade students had never encountered anything like it. It was obvious that Mrs. Thompson had deliberately chosen a problem far beyond the curriculum to challenge him. Behind him, whispers stirred like wind rustling through dry leaves. "No way he can do that," a voice murmured. "He probably does not even know where to begin," another whispered, followed by a muffled chuckle. Jamal's shoulders tightened. Still, he did not turn around. He fixed his gaze on the board. Slowly, the problem began to make sense. His heart continued to pound, but beneath the anxiety, something had begun to ignite. Determination. This was not just a moment to endure. This was a moment to step into the light. At her desk, Mrs. Thompson stood with her arms folded, eyes locked on him. For her, this was not only a test of skill, but a test of focus. She had long felt frustrated by Jamal's indifference. Now she genuinely wanted to know what would happen when he was thrust into the spotlight. "Well," she said, her voice slicing through the silence, "we are waiting." Jamal took a deep breath. He raised the marker slowly, at first his hand slightly trembling. He wrote the first few symbols cautiously, each stroke carefully measured. Then something changed. His hand grew steadier. As he moved from one step to the next, his mind took control. He began to see patterns and connections. He broke the equation into smaller parts, simplified where necessary, removed what was not essential. At first, the class remained skeptical. Some kids leaned back in their chairs expecting him to freeze. But Jamal kept going. His logic unfolded line by line. Whispers spread again. "Wait, he is actually doing it," a girl whispered. "Looks like it," her friend replied, eyes wide with surprise. Jamal did not hear them. He was immersed in the problem. He moved confidently, isolating variables, adjusting fractions, balancing both sides. The squeak of the marker filled the room like music born of logic and thought. He was not just solving the problem. He was dismantling it, dissecting it, then reconstructing it from scratch. The whispers faded. The classroom fell into silence. Even the boy who had laughed earlier was now leaning forward, mouth slightly open in amazement. Behind Jamal, Mrs. Thompson stepped closer, her eyebrows furrowed not in doubt, but in disbelief. She had expected effort, perhaps even failure. But what she saw was clarity, precision, and confidence. She followed each line he wrote, her finger lightly tracing each part of his solution. Jamal paused briefly. He reviewed the steps quickly, then completed the final segment. His hand was now steady as stone. He wrote the final answer, circled it neatly, clicked the marker close with a soft snap, and stepped back. He turned to face the class. His heart was still pounding, but his expression was calm. Behind him, the board displayed rows of clean, orderly writing. Each step flowed logically into the next. Every calculation explained itself. Seconds passed in silence. The room seemed frozen. Even the soft buzzing of the fluorescent lights above became audible in the stillness. Jamal looked around, wide eyes, open mouths. Students who had never paid him any attention now looked at him with awe. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward. Her heels tapped softly against the floor. She examined each line carefully, her lips moving slightly as she recalculated in her head. Her fingers paused over a particular step, then nodded slowly. She turned to face the class. This time her voice was gentler than usual. "It is all correct." A wave of surprise swept through the room. Then slowly clapping began. At first it was scattered, then more students joined. The sound grew louder. Jamal stood still, unsure how to respond. His cheeks burned, but not from shame, from something else, pride. As the applause faded, Mrs. Thompson spoke again. "What you just saw was not luck," she said, pointing at the board. "This is the result of true understanding." Jamal did not just solve the problem, he broke it down and rebuilt it clearly. That is what it means to truly grasp the material. Her words echoed through the room, and for the first time, Jamal did not feel like shrinking. He no longer felt the need to retreat to the window seat in the corner. He stood tall, hands by his sides, his eyes calm and steady. "Jamal," Mrs. Thompson said, her tone softer, "now why have you never spoken up? If you can do this, why do you always stay silent?" Jamal hesitated. He looked down at his worn sneakers. He did not know how to explain it. How could he express the fear of being seen, the comfort of being invisible? "I did not think anyone noticed me," he replied quietly. Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted. Her sharpness gave way to something more gentle. "Well," she said, "it is time for that to change." The applause still echoed in Jamal's ears as he made his way back to his seat. The weight of the moment settled over him like a warm blanket. His classmates, still reeling from what they had just witnessed, exchanged hushed whispers and sideways glances in his direction. Jamal could feel their eyes on him, but this time they were not filled with ridicule or dismissal. They were wide with curiosity and something that felt close to respect. Mrs. Thompson remained at the front of the room, her hands clasped in front of her as if in thought. She was not a teacher who was easily impressed, but Jamal had done more than solve a difficult equation. He had dismantled a judgment she had carried for weeks, maybe longer. He had not only challenged her assumptions about him, but perhaps about all the quiet students she had overlooked. "Class," she said, raising her voice just enough to bring the room to silence again, "what you saw today is a reminder. Every student in this room has potential. Jamal just proved that. And he did not only solve a math problem, he showed us what it looks like to approach something with clarity and focus." Jamal sat quietly at his desk, his notebook still in his hands. His heart had finally slowed, but his mind continued to race. He had not planned for this. Solving equations in the margins of his notebook had always been a private thing, something he did for himself, not for recognition. Now, for the first time, people were noticing him, and it felt both exhilarating and terrifying. A girl sitting a row ahead turned around. Her eyes were wide. "How did you do that?" she asked, her voice full of awe and disbelief. Jamal hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I just figured it out," he said softly. Another student leaned in from across the aisle. "That was insane. Are you like a genius or something?" Jamal's cheeks flushed. He shook his head quickly. "No, I just like math." As the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Mrs. Thompson called out, "Jamal, can you stay for a moment?" The class began to file out, but not before several students stopped by his desk. A few patted him on the back. Others gave him quick nods or said things like "that was awesome." Jamal nodded back, awkwardly clutching his notebook a little tighter. The attention was unfamiliar. A part of him still wanted to sink back into the background. But another part, a new part, felt a flicker of pride. Once the room had emptied, Mrs. Thompson leaned against her desk, studying Jamal with an expression he could not quite read. "Jamal," she began, her voice gentler. "Then before I owe you an apology," Jamal blinked. He was not sure he had heard her correctly. "An apology." She nodded slowly. "I have been teaching for a long time, and I like to think I know how to read my students. But with you," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I got it wrong. I thought your quietness meant you were not interested. I assumed your lack of participation meant you did not care. Clearly, I was wrong." Jamal shifted in his seat, unsure of what to say. "It is okay," he mumbled. "No," she said, "it is not. You have a gift, Jamal, and I do not want to see you hide it. Do you realize how rare it is for someone your age to solve a problem like that? To think the way you do?" Jamal looked down at his notebook. His fingers ran along the worn edges of the cover. "I do not know," he said quietly. "I just like doing it. It makes sense to me." Mrs. Thompson's expression softened even more. "That is exactly what makes it special. You see things differently. And that is something to be proud of. But here is the thing: you cannot keep it to yourself. There are programs, competitions, even advanced courses that could really help you grow, challenge you. I would be happy to help you find them if you are interested." Jamal's heart started to beat faster again. The idea of stepping out beyond the quiet safety of his own learning, of letting other people see what he could do, was thrilling but also deeply frightening. He thought back to the moment at the board, the way the equation had clicked in his mind, the way the room had felt different afterward. Could he do more? Could he be more? I do not know, he said honestly. What if I mess up? Mrs. Thompson gave him a small smile. Messing up is part of learning, but if you do not try, you will never know what you are capable of. That night, Jamal sat at the small kitchen table in his family's modest home, his notebook open in front of him. The yellow light above the table cast a warm glow over the pages where equations and unfinished thoughts curved along the margins like vines. His parents sat nearby, listening intently as he recounted what had happened at school. The equation, the silence, the clapping, Mrs. Thompson's offer. His mother's eyes glistened with pride as she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Jamal, we have always known you were special. I am so glad others are starting to see it too. His father nodded, his deep voice calm and sure. This is just the beginning, son. Do not be afraid to show the world what you can do. Jamal nodded slowly. His mind was spinning. The attention at school, the invitation to explore new opportunities, the quiet certainty in his parents' voices. It all felt surreal. He had always solved problems in his notebook for himself because he loved the logic, the structure, the way numbers always followed rules, even when life did not. It had been his private world, one no one had ever stepped into, not even his parents. Now, that world was opening. He stared at the blank page for a long moment. The lines were waiting. He picked up his pencil and began to write. Not just equations this time, but thoughts, questions, ideas. Things he wanted to understand, things he wanted to try. For the first time, his notebook did not feel like a place to hide. It felt like a place to begin. The next day, the atmosphere in room 3002 had shifted. Jamal Carter, the quiet boy who always sat by the window now, walked into class and found himself greeted with nod smiles and even a few high fives. Yo, Jamal, a boy called out from the back of the room that was crazy yesterday. How'd you even do that? Jamal hesitated. His instinct to shrink away was still there, but it was now being challenged by something else. Something that told him it was okay to be seen. I just worked through it, he said modestly, sliding into his usual seat. That was not just working through it, another girl said, leaning across her desk. You made it look easy. You were like a math wizard or something. Jamal's cheeks flushed again. He shrugged slightly. Thanks, he muttered. Even students who had never spoken to him before now seemed interested. Some asked if he could help them with homework. Others just wanted to know what he was into. For the first time, Jamal did not feel invisible. Mrs. Thompson entered the classroom with her usual purposeful stride, but today her energy was different. She glanced at Jamal as she set her materials down, and there was a trace of a smile in her expression. She began the lesson, as always, writing on the board, explaining the day's topic, but her tone was less rigid. When she called on Jamal to answer a question, her voice carried encouragement, not challenge. Jamal paused before responding. He was still getting used to the new attention, but then he answered clearly. His explanation was concise, thoughtful, and correct. The class murmured in quiet awe. Mrs. Thompson nodded with satisfaction. Excellent, she said warmly. That is the kind of thinking we need to see more of. After class, she asked Jamal to stay behind again. This time, it was not about apologies. It was about what came next. Jamal, she said, sitting on the edge of her desk, I have been thinking about what we talked about yesterday. You have a gift, and I do not want it to go to waste. Jamal looked down at his notebook. He felt more certain now, but still unsure of how to step into something bigger. I do not really know what to do with it, he admitted. That is where I can help, she said. There is an advanced math program at the district level, a class for students like you who need more challenge. It meets after school twice a week. I think you would be a perfect fit. Jamal's eyes widened slightly. The idea excited him. It also intimidated him. Do you think I would be good enough for it, he asked. Mrs. Thompson smiled. I do not think. You have already proven it. This is a chance for you to see how far you can go. I have already spoken to the program coordinator. They are excited to meet you. Jamal's mind raced. He thought about the moment at the board, the sudden hush in the room, the way his classmates had looked at him afterward. He thought about his parents' faces when he told them what had happened. Slowly he nodded. Okay, he said, I will do it. The following week, Jamal walked into a new classroom, one he had never seen before. It was not part of Riverside Middle, but located at the district's education center. The room had tall windows, clean whiteboards on all sides, and rows of neat desks that gleamed under bright lights. There were no bells, no chatter, only a quiet hum of anticipation. Students from different schools filled the seats. Some were talking softly, others flipping through textbooks filled with advanced problems. Jamal took a seat near the back, his notebook resting on his desk. He looked around. Everyone here looked confident, focused, sharp. His heart beat a little faster. Was he really ready for this? Could he keep up? Then the instructor walked in. He was younger than Jamal expected, dressed simply, but with a sharpness in his step. He introduced himself quickly and launched straight into a complex number theory problem, speaking with clarity and enthusiasm. To Jamal's surprise, his nerves began to settle. The problem on the board was tough, but it sparked something in him. He leaned forward, pencil in hand, already breaking the question into parts before the instructor finished writing. His mind clicked into place. Here finally was a space that moved at his speed. As the class continued, Jamal found himself swept into a rhythm he had only known in solitude. The instructor asked a question. Jamal raised his hand. He answered correctly, clearly. Other students turned to look at him, but not with mockery or surprise. With recognition, he belonged here. Back at Riverside, Jamal's days changed too. He was no longer the boy by the window that everyone overlooked. Classmates came to him with questions. At lunch, some even asked if he could explain homework problems. He never bragged. He simply listened, thought, and offered answers, quietly, kindly, just as he always had. Mrs. Thompson noticed the change, not just in how others saw him, but in how Jamal carried himself. He no longer slouched at his desk or avoided eye contact. When he walked into class, there was purpose in his step. When he spoke, there was clarity. And when he looked out the window, it was not out of escape, but reflection. One day after class, she stopped him again. Jamal, I just wanted to say, I am proud of you. Not just for what you can do, but for having the courage to step forward. That is not easy. Jamal looked at her and nodded. He still did not say much, but the way he met her gaze said more than words could. That evening at home, Jamal opened his notebook again. The pages that once held secrets now held possibilities. He wrote with new confidence, new questions, new goals. His father walked by and paused behind him, watching silently. "You're working late," he said gently. Jamal smiled without looking up. "It doesn't feel like work." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's how you know it matters." And Jamal knew it did, more than ever. From that day on, Jamal no longer walked through the halls of Riverside Middle unnoticed. The boy who had once hidden behind silence now moved with quiet assurance. His classmates still spoke in whispers when he passed by, but now the tone was different. It was not confusion or doubt, it was admiration. A girl from another class passed him in the hallway and gave him a thumbs up. A younger boy asked if he could help with a math puzzle he had seen on the internet. At first, Jamal did not know how to react. He was not used to the attention. But little by little, he began to embrace it not as a spotlight, but as an extension of something deeper. A willingness to share what he loved. In Mrs. Thompson's class, his seat by the window remained the same, but the way he sat had changed. He no longer slouched with his head in the clouds. Now he listened carefully, eyes sharp, posture, straight pencil, always ready. When asked to solve a problem on the board, he no longer hesitated. He rose, walked up, and explained his process with calm precision. Sometimes the class clapped, sometimes they just stared. Either way, Jamal felt something inside him strengthen with every step he took forward. Mrs. Thompson continued to push him, but now with a tone that carried encouragement instead of suspicion. She gave him extra problems to solve, lent him books from her own collection, and sometimes stayed after class just to talk. "You think differently," she said once, as he returned a textbook on advanced algebra, "and I do not want that to be something you hide. I want it to be something you use." Jamal nodded. He was beginning to understand that what he had kept in the margins of his notebook for so long was more than a private talent. It was a language, one that could open doors, connect people, create meaning. At home, his parents noticed the change too. He talked more at dinner, asked more questions. Even his little sister began to sit beside him while he worked, fascinated by the strange symbols and neat lines on his pages. "What does that mean?" she asked one evening, pointing to a formula. "It is a way of finding balance," he said, smiling, "like figuring out what's missing and where it belongs." She tilted her head, curious. "Like solving a mystery." Exactly. Jamal's world was still quiet, still full of long moments spent staring at pages, thinking through puzzles, testing patterns. But now that quiet was alive with purpose. The fire he had always carried inside was no longer a flicker hidden behind a window. It was something real, something growing. And deep down, he knew. This was only the beginning. The following month brought new challenges, but Jamal welcomed them. The advanced math program was now part of his weekly routine, and every session felt like stepping into a world that had been waiting for him all along. The problems were harder, the pace faster, and the expectations higher. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, Jamal felt alive. For the first time, he was surrounded by peers who did not mock his silence or misunderstand his gaze. They spoke in numbers and logic, and he understood every word. At Riverside, word about Jamal continued to spread. Some teachers began to notice him more. calling on him for his thoughts, asking if he would like to help with tutoring or join academic clubs. One day during lunch, a group of students gathered around him, curious and excited. They asked how he learned, how he practiced, how he stayed so calm. Jamal answered honestly. He had no secret. He just loved the process. The way numbers fit together, the way problems could be unraveled with enough patience and clarity. But even as the attention grew, Jamal never let it change the core of who he was. He remained thoughtful, steady, humble. He still spent time by the window, still found peace in the quiet spaces between moments. What changed was how he used that space. No longer to hide, but to reflect, to prepare. Mrs. Thompson continued to be a steady presence in his journey. One afternoon after class, she handed him a flyer. "There is a regional math competition coming up," she said, "and I think you should enter. You are more than ready." Jamal looked at the paper. The words felt big. Competition, regional. It sounded like something meant for someone else, someone louder, someone bolder. "Do you really think I could do it?" he asked. Mrs. Thompson did not hesitate. "I know you can." That evening, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, the flyer beside his notebook. He stared at it for a long time, his pencil tapping lightly against the wood. His parents watched him quietly, giving him space. Finally, his mother spoke. "You do not have to decide tonight, but whatever you choose, we believe in you." Jamal nodded. He still felt the tremble of uncertainty, but he also felt the steady rhythm of everything he had learned, everything he had become. He was not just a boy solving problems alone. He was someone who had stood up, been seen, and still kept moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to rise a little higher. On the day of the regional competition, Jamal woke up before dawn. The sky outside was still dark. The streets quiet, the morning air cool and sharp. He dressed slowly, choosing a simple shirt and jeans, then stood by the window for a long time, watching the soft glow of the city awaken in silence. He felt the familiar tremble in his chest, that quiet fear that always came before something unknown, but this time it did not paralyze him. It simply reminded him that he was stepping into a space he had once believed was never meant for someone like him. His mother made him breakfast, his father drove him to the event center. Neither said much during the ride, but Jamal could feel the quiet pride in their presence, the way his father rested a steady hand on his shoulder before he stepped out of the car. Inside the room buzzed with energy. Students from all over the region sat in rows, some with laptops, others flipping through notebooks filled with formulas. Teachers and judges moved among the tables, handing out sheets, checking lists. Jamal found his seat. His hands were cold, his heart racing. But when he looked down at the paper in front of him, something inside him settled. The equations stared back at him like old friends. The fear did not disappear, but it shifted, transforming into focus. He began to write. Line after line, number after number, his pencil danced across the page. His mind worked quickly, not with panic, but with clarity. He did not rush. He moved through the problems like a quiet storm, precise and steady. Around him, the sounds of scribbling, sighing, murmuring filled the room, but he heard none of it. All he heard was the rhythm of thought, the hum of logic. By the time he finished, his hand was sore, his back stiff, but his face was calm. He looked at the last equation one more time, then placed his pencil down. He did not know how he would rank or what the others had done, but he knew he had given everything he had. That was enough. When the results were announced later that afternoon, Jamal sat quietly listening to names being called. Third place, second place. Then, before he could prepare himself, they said his name, first place, Jamal Carter. For a second, he did not move. The applause seemed distant, like a wave crashing far away. Then someone nudged him gently. He stood, walked to the stage, accepted the small plaque they handed him. The judges shook his hand. The flash of a camera lit the room. He looked out at the crowd and saw Mrs. Thompson standing near the back, clapping. Her eyes met his. She smiled, not with surprise, but with recognition. When he stepped off the stage, the air felt different, lighter, as if something inside him had cracked open and let in a new kind of light. That evening, as he sat once again at the kitchen table, his little sister spinning in circles nearby, Jamal opened his notebook. He looked at the fresh page, then wrote something at the top. "I am not just good at math. I belong here." He smiled, and then he kept writing. Returning to Riverside Middle, after the competition, Jamal noticed that the hallways no longer felt so narrow. He still sat by the window, still watched the trees sway outside when his thoughts wandered, but something had shifted. When he walked into class, heads turned, not out of curiosity, but out of quiet respect. Some nodded, some smiled. Even the ones who used to laugh now looked at him differently. During lunch, a boy from another class sat beside him with his tray. "You're Jamal, right?" he said. "I heard you won that competition." Jamal nodded, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, I did." The boy leaned closer. "So, do you just see the answers in your head, or what?" Jamal laughed, a small sound that surprised even him. "Not really. I just break it down one step at a time." That was all he said, but it was enough. The boy smiled, nodded, and they kept talking not just about math, but about school books, life. And slowly a circle began to form around Jamal. Not loud, not big, but real. Mrs. Thompson noticed the shift too. She watched as Jamal spoke more in class as he helped others, without being asked, as he began to carry not only his talent, but also his presence. She gave him space to lead, let him explain problems on the board, encouraged students to ask him questions. And when she stood back and watched him speak with quiet confidence, she felt a pride she could not quite describe. One day she called him to her desk after class. "There's a state-level program coming up," she said. "Only a few students from the district will be chosen, but I'd like to nominate you." Jamal blinked. "Really? You think I should try?" She looked him in the eye. "I think you're already ready." That night, Jamal sat in his room, the nomination form resting on his desk. He traced the edge of the paper with his finger, thinking. He thought about the board, the classroom, the competition, the applause, the silence after. He thought about the way it all felt, both overwhelming and familiar, like a storm he had already weathered. Finally, he picked up his pencil and signed his name. The following weeks moved quickly. Between school advanced classes and preparation for the state-level program, Jamal barely had time to sit by the window anymore. But something inside him had shifted. He no longer needed to watch the world from a distance. He was now part of it. His notebook, once filled with quiet thoughts written in the margins, now overflowed with ideas, challenges, and goals. Each page marked a step forward, a problem solved, a fear overcome. His parents watched him with quiet pride. Every evening they asked him about his classes, listened as he explained things they could not always understand but always respected. His little sister still sat beside him, sometimes doodling in her own notebook, glancing at his pages as if they held some kind of secret magic. For Jamal, they did. At school, his classmates no longer saw him as the quiet kid by the window. He had become something more. Not just the math genius or the boy who won the competition, but someone they could come to. Someone who listened. Someone who shared. Even teachers began asking him for ideas for input on how to help other students who struggled. Jamal took it all in stride, not with arrogance, but with quiet responsibility. One afternoon after school had ended, and the sun cast golden light across the classroom floor, Mrs. Thompson stood beside Jamal as he packed his things. "You've changed," she said in a good way. Jamal smiled slightly. "I think I just stopped hiding," she nodded. "Promise me something, Jamal. Don't ever dim that light again, no matter how quiet the room gets." He paused, then looked up at her, his voice calm and certain. "I won't." As he walked home that evening, the wind stirred the leaves along the sidewalk. The world felt open, full of possibility. Jamal no longer wondered if he belonged. He no longer feared being seen. He knew who he was. A thinker, a solver, a boy who once watched the world from a window and now had stepped fully into it. And though the road ahead was long and the challenges greater than any equation he had faced, Jamal Carter was ready. Ready to write his future one page at a time,